so much time that I might not even have time to finish. Welcome to the Chief of the North with RGR Football. I'm Seth Kaiser, the Chief of the North, and we are here every Thursday to talk some Chiefs, answer some mailbag questions, maybe talk about frozen pizzas, or why I think Hosea is an underrated book of the Old Testament. Whatever we end up getting to, that's what we'll get to. Today, there's a lot to talk about. I've had some people ask me about Chris Jones, of course. His holdout continues. Some questions about training camp and just some random stuff in general. I've got a little bit that I want to talk about from training camp. And I want to talk about a really interesting discussion that came up with regards to Nick Bolton and the MVP of the Super Bowl. That's going to get me in trouble with people, but it's actually a really good opportunity to talk about why I do what I do and why I view football the way that I do. So I'm excited to do all of it. We're going to roll right into it. Do the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe. I don't know, do some kind of dance. I'm not sure exactly what's required for YouTube because I'm a million years old. So first things first, mailbag questions every week. Put some in here with a question mark in front of them, and then those will get priority, and I'll get to those first. This week, I'm only going to get to a few Twitter ones that I threw up there at the last second, but that's the way that you can participate in the mailbag. Let's look at some of the questions from last week. A few of you said even more kind things. Ryan White, you just building me up way too much. And I appreciate a few people had mentioned that they enjoyed last week being kind of a longer video. I'll think about that in terms of what I can provide in terms of especially kind of walking through the way I view the game, that kind of stuff. That's something I'll certainly think about. I really appreciate everyone. So let's work through a few questions. This is going to be kind of a preview of the Jones dilemma. B. Matthews 15 asked, do you think Jones would play out his contract and on the tag next year for $32.5 million? Do you think Sue would be a good fit at nose tackle? Can Izzy Johnson play safety for in a pinch? Unfortunately, Johnson got injured, which is a bummer. Sue is much more of a gap penetrator. So he would be, and then I believe he may have been signed, actually, now that I think about it. There's really no one that you could sign that can do remotely what Chris Jones does, unfortunately. That's just how it works. I think Shelby Harris is still on the free agent market. He's a guy that, if you're in a pinch, I personally think they should have signed him already, regardless. He's a talented player. He played well last year, but obviously it's just worlds apart. Do I think Jones would play out his contract and on the tag next year? I think that's part of the problem and is terms of leverage. And so we'll get to that when I answer a question about Chris Jones shortly. So yes, I think he'd be willing to do that, but I also think the team would be willing to do that potentially. And I think that's one reason why we're in a problem here. It's because you've got the very rare negotiation where both sides have a great deal of leverage. I've got, this is not really a question. Rogue demagogue, kind of demagogues a little bit. And he asked about, will Mahomes take care of his body? He looks a bit chubby to me, and he's only 27 playing football. You should meet Mahomes in person. He's incredibly muscular and in really good shape. He wears those rib protectors, and because he's a pretty muscular guy, it presents as though he might be a little bit chubby. But it's actually kind of funny if you meet him in person. His arms are unbelievably huge in person. It's ridiculous. And that was a rather long thing. Again, I like it. Rogue demagogue. He did a little demagoguing, and I appreciate that. Let's see. We've got Crocoror asks, how in the Hades, language people, did we get Drew Tranquil, Charles Menahu, and Mike Edwards so cheap and easy? Dude, these guys, and I had to bleep out another one there, are starters, and none of them are old. I think Mike Edwards, I'm not sure if he's necessarily a starter. The people that I've talked to that know him from his Bucs days, he's a guy who can be a starter in a pinch, but he's not going to be a high-end starter, so you're better off you can find someone else to do it. But he's a guy who can rotate in as the third safety, be part of a two high, and your defense isn't going to get weaker. And so, that goes really towards your point. Menahu and Tranquil, I think it's a good example of guys that are viewed as having specific skill sets. And there's always opportunity to grab guys like that. One way, people talk about the Patriot way all the time. And people talk about the Patriot way in particular with regards to letting big money guys walk maybe, or people take cheaper deals, stuff like that. Really, the Patriot way, in my opinion, is a few things, one of which was having one of the greatest coaches ever with one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. When you combine those two, it's exponential, especially considering Belichick's primary ability is defense. So you had one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time constantly with a top 10 defense year after year after year. But one thing that I would call the Patriot way, and this is more of a Belichick thing, is that he's consistently able to identify guys that can do things well, that he can fit within his system, and in a way that maximizes their strengths and minimalizes their weaknesses. That's why you see so many linebackers in particular that play better in New England than they do anywhere else, because other guys aren't quite as able to do that. So Belichick isn't necessarily looking for guys who can do everything. He's looking for guys that can do certain things, and then he calls his defense and designs his defense around those things, and that allows him to succeed. Are you best off with guys who can do everything? Of course. But those guys are much more rare in the NFL, of course. And so that's something to think about in terms of Amenahud and Tranquil and Edwards. They might have a few limitations here and there, but they might fit in really well with what Spags does, and that's a big deal. Tranquil's a starting level linebacker, but there are some talented guys at linebacker that just aren't being signed these days. Trebu says, hey, Seth, I meant MVS on the clock for next season when it comes to Justin Ross. Oh, sure, especially with the money he's making. MVS should have a really good season, though. I think they keep MVS around for all 3 years is my guess, although his contract gets a little more pricey in that third year, and it's all funny money. And Ross generally is more of a boundary X winner who maybe isn't quite as much of a deep threat in terms of that deep speed as MVS. So I don't necessarily see their roles overlapping. I see them as being very assuming Justin Ross works out, which I'm maintaining my cautious optimism. But now it's cautious optimism, not cautious pessimism. So the guy's winning me over. I'm going to try to talk about that if we have time here. But I think with those are more complementary skill sets when you've got a guy who can be a boundary winner, back shoulder throws, corner routes, comebacks, even stuff that some of it's a little more shallow or intermediate. Whereas again, MVS is the guy that's pushing the ball down the field, forcing defenses to remain in shells and too high. Man, there's so much optimism about the receivers. Grayson Neely asks if Tony comes back by week 1 and everything is fine. Do you see him taking the majority of the wide receiver snaps? I do. I think he'd probably be out there for 75% of the snaps is my guess. I think they've got big plans for him. Ryan White asks, Seth, let's live in the universe where this year, I'm going to exclude Tony for the sake of this because of his injury and unknown, Sky Moore takes a huge step forward. It's all caps, so huge. Let's say on pace for close to 1,000 yards. Also, Rashid comes in and has an impact like that, which we've never seen from a rookie receiver in Reed's offense, say on pace for 700-ish yards. So for purposes of this, we'll say that Rice adequately fills in the Juju Smith-Schuster role by and large. And Justin Ross comes in and plays like everyone's hoping he plays with another 600 or 700-yard pace. First of all, if all that happens, because, well, I'll finish the question. If in the first month and a half of the season, the 3 young wide receivers are going gangbusters, could you see MVS possibly coming trade bait for a late round pick or player swap? I feel like it would be nice to get something for him because if this scenario, something remotely similar, actually plays out, I'd be willing to bet Veach sees MVS as expendable with no guaranteed money left on his deal beyond 2023, plus his $10 million salary off the books would go a long way in retaining Snead. I sound like I'm trying to axe MVS any way possible, but I don't hate him. Guys, why does Ryan hate MVS? I just think we could get more of that money elsewhere, and maybe more out of his wide receiver position if his reps went to the other guys. Here's what I would say. Unless Moore, Rice, or Ross show a particular predilection for being deep threats in a way that they weren't necessarily all the time in college, the closest one, all 3 of them did it sometimes in college, but none of them have that top gear that MVS has. So I'd be hesitant to do that. I think Ross is probably the closest thing, because he's more of a pure boundary guy, similar to MVS. However, I think if you're in that situation, you try to win the Super Bowl this year with 4 good receivers. You never know when someone's going to get hurt, and we're excluding Tony for the sake of the unknown. And so I think, you never know how these young guys are going to do in the playoffs. You never know how they're going to do in the biggest games. And that's a big deal. That's something they know about MVS. And additionally, again, when I look at the schematic advantage that they need in terms of threatening deep, and without Ross or Moore or Rice showing they can be those guys, maybe they can. Maybe all three of them have shown the ability to be legitimate deep threats. Then maybe it's a conversation. But for me, I would much rather go through the season with as talented a wide receiver room as possible and try to win it all. And then also have some insurance in case, like in the AFC Championship, you've got 2 or 3 receivers that go down for the count. You want as much depth as possible there. I just don't think the juice is worth the squeeze in terms of I don't think you would get I don't think you'd get like a second round pick for MVS or something like that. And so you might end up getting like a 5th round pick or something. And then you've given away some of your one of your proven guys, flexibility, that the schematic stuff that he does do for you in terms of forcing defenses to really respect the deep ball. So I don't think I would do that. Even if all 3 of them come out and play well, average to above average as wide receivers, I still wouldn't do it because I just don't think you can ever have too many good receivers or depth. And again, with his contract being what it is this year, I just don't think it really matters. In terms of retaining Snead, that $10 million hit this year doesn't really move the needle one way or another with retaining Snead. I think there you need to see exactly what the young guys do. I don't think they're going to probably extend Snead's contract right now. I think they're going to wait till the season is over, see how McDuffie, Watson, and Williams do. And with some of the stuff with Johnson, they had high hopes for him. I've heard some really good things about Nick Jones too. They're just really good at finding corners, and that makes it harder to pay one, especially one who can get paid. Charvarius Ward got a really good payday elsewhere, and Snead could probably get an even better one. So that's going to be a tough one for them. Aliu Bank 6920 says, "Are you a bot or a real person? No person can be so knowledgeable." Let me just tell you, that's super kind of you to say, but I've been blessed enough to have some great conversations with people that really know football, and I am an amateur that works at it. And so you're very kind, but it's my job is to. Someone replied, "Paying attention is key." It's my job to kind of look at things at the next level, try to examine everything a little bit deeper. And that actually brings me to just a quick thing I want to talk about. But first, I'd feel bad if I put this question out on Twitter and then didn't respond to anyone. So we've got some questions on Twitter here. Nick Deal asks, "What's the realistic expectation for Justin Ross?" I feel like 6 weeks ago was making 53, but consensus feels like it's beyond that now. For me right now, the realistic expectation right now is making the 53 and maybe rotating it a little. We'll see after preseason. I'm really excited to look at that all 22. My expectations have risen because I had a few people ask me about this. My expectations have risen for him since the pads came on, and he's continued to find success with the first team offense. That's a big deal. My understanding is I think of all of them, I think Sky Moore is probably showing out the most from what I've heard, but it sounds like Rice is doing really well and Ross is doing really well and Moore is doing really well, which is like, my expectation is it can't all go that well, right? That's not how this works. You can't grab multiple receivers and have them all work out. I don't think. That would be awesome though. So I think the realistic expectation for him remains, making the roster and maybe even rotating in a bit. I've watched some of the clips from training camp once the pads came on. Before pads, it's not real, even with receivers, because it's so different in terms of contact through the routes, and that's what throws off so many receivers that are fine at the college level and are good athletes, but they can't deal with contact and get to their spot on time. Maybe I really could see it happening, but I think expecting more than that of him at this point is just a big jump when we think of how long it's been since he was really dominant at the college level. So, but I'm more excited than I was. A bunch of people asked me about Chris Jones. Here's what I'll say. Again, this is a contract negotiation where both sides have leverage. The Chiefs could, in theory, just let him play out the last year of his deal and then tag him next year. Now, that tag is really expensive next year, and I'm assuming they plan on revamping at least one position group like they do every year under Veach. But it's possible. And so for them, they're probably looking at a starting point of guaranteed money around $60 million and trying to figure out like $25 million per year. In the meantime, they're probably looking a little above Quinnen Williams. In the meantime, Chris Jones can correctly say, I am not just a tiny bit better than Quinnen Williams. I am every bit as good, at least I was last year, as Aaron Donald. and he's been the only guy remotely in the conversation with Donald for a few years. So I get why maybe his stance is, well, Donald's at 31.2 or something like that, and these other guys are at 24. I should be closer to Donald than I should be these other guys because I am in a class by myself. I'm not stressed about it yet, but Jones does have a point in terms of all this. And someone, Daniel Jensen, asked, can this defense work without him? In theory, maybe. In practice, if you go back and watch close games that the Chiefs were in last year, you can see the number of games that really turned on Chris Jones making big plays. Now, can Mahomes account for that? Sure, absolutely. But it makes it a lot harder. There's an argument to be made that the Chiefs right now, and I don't even know if it's really much of an argument, to be perfectly honest, that the Chiefs have literally the best player in the league at quarterback, at wide receiver, a tight end, an interior pass rusher. And I actually don't think it's even that tough of an argument to make. Jones is one of the best 5 pass rushers in the entire league, let alone, on the interior. He's got an argument for being the best pass rusher, period. There's a few other guys there that make it tough. But so those, to me, are the guys you pay, you build around them. But we'll see. I think they both have leverage, and that's why this is so tough. King Sangre asks, if 7 wide receivers make the roster, which position group gets affected? Which player do you predict? I'm not going to make a player prediction because I just don't think it's the time right now. My guess is it would have to be running back or tight end. And I guess my thoughts on it, given the importance of 13 personnel for the Chiefs, I think it should be running back. You roll with 3 of them. You can't have 4 of them if you're going to have 7 wide receivers. And then you're going to need someone to, do special teams there at the bottom. All right. I wanted to move into a conversation just very briefly. My Twitter mentions became a mess this week because Cole over at How About Those Chiefs, great dude, he asked if Nick Bolton had picked up the scoop and score in he did pick it up if it hadn't been called off because of a penalty in the Super Bowl. If I would have, and he asked like the reader, would you have awarded him MVP of the Super Bowl? And a lot of people said yes. I said no. And because, people like to joke around that I only think Nick Bolton is good, but not great, that I'm kind of being a hater or something like that. But for me, it's actually representative of a larger conversation. And it's about how you view the game. And the reason I do this job is because, there's a lot of reasons I do this job. I love it. But for me, the more I learn about football and the more I understand how everything kind of works together and what's actually going on the field, the more I love the sport, the more I see how unbelievably intricate it all is and how it all ties together. And part of that is really breaking through box score statistical analysis at the very basic level, figure out what actually happened on the field. And so for me, like an example of this, Sky Moore's stats show that he scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl. What you and I know what happened on the field, and good on him for executing it. My understanding, I think it was Kelsey that was lined up wrong. That led to Moore being lined up the wrong side or something like that. I don't know. But maybe it was Moore that was lined up on the wrong side. But what you and I know is that he was schemed wide open. So that touchdown, while very impactful, that touchdown wasn't really a Sky Moore touchdown or even really a Patrick Mahomes touchdown. That was an Andy Reid touchdown, right? A different example, like Mahomes' scramble, that was the most important play of the game by expected points added and the team's expectancy by not an EPA, sorry, but by win percentage. That was a play that was more of an individual play, right? He recognized that they were rushing 5, they were in man, that they weren't going to have the ability to stop him. He stepped up very calmly through just a tiny bit of pressure and found a lane and gutted it out for a ton of extra yards. That's not a coach-led thing, and it's not, the wide receivers doing that for him. That's Mahomes reading the field perfectly, making a fast decision and grabbing a bunch of yards. So even though that scramble was worth fewer points than a touchdown, it's a much more impressive play. When I think about value, I think about value above replacement. Did this player on this play do something that someone else in their stead, as in an average NFL player could not have made? And the more often you make plays that an average guy maybe could not have made, the more valuable you are. And so for me, most valuable player isn't just most valuable player, it's most valuable player above replacement. And it's not about box score analysis. It's about what happened on the field. So in Nick Bolton's case, he did a nice job staying assignment sound on the Hurts fumble and scoop and score, but he didn't force the fumble. Hurts dropped it. And the ball, which is not round, as Nate Taylor always says, bounced up to him. Some of that, well, a lot of that is luck. He made a good play that became a very impactful play due to luck. Similar thing with the scoop and score, where really he didn't really do anything there. L'Jarius Sneed made a terrific play on the ball, forced it out with a great tackle, and once again, Bolton was there for the quick scoop and score. And again, that was more luck than anything else. Nothing that any NFL linebacker would have been able to grab. Before you think I'm hating on Nick Bolton, I wrote about how well he played in the Super Bowl. Those 2 plays weren't even his best 5 plays that day. He made multiple really good plays, but those weren't them. And that's why for me, like that second scoop and score would not move the needle. And here's an example of this. And it actually kind of helps that it's Nick Bolton again. So something to notice, and hey, absolute shout out to our friends at the Kansas City Sports Network. They've been doing a lot of great stuff in training camp. And I just really appreciate it. Everyone should follow what they do as well. They do great work. So this play is a terrific example of a way to look a little bit beyond the box score and about what occurred. So you got Mahomes rolling out, and obviously, it would have been a sack in a real game because Spags dialed it up a bit, but they keep playing to the end. That's one thing to know. Here's the second thing to know. So Mahomes is going to make a throw down the field here, and right here you've got, I don't even know who it is running across the field. It's 24, Sky Moore. So Mahomes makes the throw. What I want you to do is I want you to watch Moore's track his movement here. You see how he's gaining steps, and then he has to slow down, and Bolton smartly plays the receiver, gets his hands in the air, is able to knock it down, and he collects the interception. But the reality of the situation, even though an interception was collected here, that doesn't mean that this was great coverage here. What happened was Mahomes tried to make an off-balance throw, kind of messing around a little bit, and you see Moore, if this ball gets put out over here, Moore runs underneath it, and he scores. But what happens, he has to slow down, and Bolton has time to catch up. Now, is that to take away from Bolton making a play there? No, he was somewhat in position, and that allowed him to recover when there was even an off-base throw. That's part of being good on defense, putting yourself in position to make a play if the offense makes a mistake, and that's what happened here. So I'm not saying Bolton made a bad play. What I'm saying is what happened here, more specifically, was that Mahomes made an off-target throw, off bounds. And again, he's kind of messing around. It's training camp. And because Moore had to slow down, it becomes tipped. And then Bolton, great job in concentration gathering it in. Again, that's a play that's an example of, if you just read on the box sheet, Nick Bolton with an interception, right? Or someone were to just kind of watch the play and not really think about what really occurred there, they might say something like, well, I was told Nick Bolton isn't great in coverage. Well, here he is. And the reality is it wasn't a great coverage snap. It was an okay-ish coverage snap for a linebacker. Maybe okay. He was put in a bad spot there, trying to run across the field with the receiver on that route. Almost no linebacker outside of, your Fred Warners. I think Willie Gay Jr. could probably keep up there. Maybe Tranquil. They've got 2 guys that could maybe keep up in that situation. But why am I going so in depth on this? It's so that you understand a little bit more maybe where I'm coming from when I look at plays. The result of the play, of course, matters in terms of whether the team wins or loses. But the process is how you figure out, the what happened. That's how you try to extrapolate what a player is. Or not extrapolate. That's how you figure out who a player is on that play. And then you take a bunch of those and you figure out who he is currently and how you can also maybe extrapolate who he will be moving forward. All right. I took way more time on this than I was going to. I appreciate every one of you. I think you're all awesome. Make sure to do all the YouTube things. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I've enjoyed talking about it. Appreciate you guys every week. And you know what? It's a great week to be a Chiefs fan, guys. Thanks again.